Hello and welcome to Newsnight. I am Ladi Akeredoluwale. Thanks for joining us. My guest on today's edition of the program believes that zoning and the politics of 2023 will be very interesting, especially if it leads to a more inclusive governance structure. My guest also thinks the educational system is in a very sorry state indeed, and that could prove to be a significant problem in the development aspirations of the country. Newsnight talks to veteran journalist, columnist, and professor of political science, Adebayo Williams. Prof, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Let me begin from a role you played that either deliberately or possibly inadvertently, quite a number of people do not know. And that is in the June 12, 1993 presidential election and its aftermath. Those were traumatic times for you.
Well, not on a personal level. I'm just deeply regretful that despite all the sacrifices, this is where we are. But that is in the nature of nations. Some people struggle and fall by the wayside. Others pick up the struggle and it goes on forever. So,
but given the amount of sacrifice that some of you made, before we came on here, you said you were in exile for 5 years. You didn't come back for a longer period than that,
yes.
Much longer period than that. And then one would have thought, someone like you ought to have thought that perhaps some of the lessons that could have been drawn from that episode would have helped us in the struggle or in the drive to become a better country, more democratic, more development-oriented. And you say you regret that. Is that in relation to that, perhaps?
Yes, kind of. I mean, a nation that went through that kind of low-intensity warfare for about 5 years, and then suddenly civilian rule was restored, we ought to have done much better. But we thank God that the premier lesson of June 12 has been learnt and taken to heart in this country. And that is that the military have no place in public governance. That lesson has been learnt. And that is why we're enjoying the relative peace now that we're enjoying. But on every other indices, we are not doing very well. There's still massive corruption. There's still some authoritarian impulse and impetus behind governance. There is still impunity, which you normally associate with military regimes. And you cannot say beyond demilitarization that the democratic culture in Nigeria has grown by leaps and bounds.
When you say that, there are those who will say, well, Prof is looking at the glass as half empty instead of half full, that between 1999 and now, we've had over 22 years of uninterrupted rule, uninterrupted democratic rule, and that incrementally we have sought to improve on some of the processes, the battles against corruption and so on. Is it a fair argument from those who make that kind of statement that, okay, we're not there yet, but we're on the way there? Are we on the way there?
We may be, or we may not be. It depends on events.
But the events so far?
Human action. I mean, when you say that one is looking at it from the glass ceiling, it depends on individual temperament. Some people are pessimists, some are born optimists. But the fact remains that a society evolves by a combination of evolutionary means and revolutionary means. Sometimes we have to hasten some of these processes. And so if we go by mere evolution, of course, something has taken place in Nigeria. Something has replaced the military rule. But even some of the greatest purveyors of this current system will shy away from calling it a democracy. I hope you're aware of that.
Indeed, quite a number of them have already said it's civil rule, not democracy.
Okay.
Okay, if that is the background that we're looking at, then perhaps the question could be more pointed, which is that if we are not yet a full-fledged democracy, are we on the way to being that? And I'll use something as a peg. One of the most obvious manifestations of a democratic system is elections.
Yeah.
Periodic elections where people get to choose who leads at various levels. We keep tinkering with the laws that govern that process. Only recently, the National Assembly passed, even though the president is yet to assent to it, but passed amendments to the law to, as they say, make it more transparent. Electronic transmission of results, where possible, electronic voting and all of that. Using that as a peg, do you think we are doing better than we were in 1999?
Yeah. For the mere fact that you cannot hold elections during military rule, who are you going to elect? But then, election is not the most vital component of democracy or civilian rule. An obsession with election is just what is known in political science theory as electoralism. That is, you are just focused on election. There are so many other components like free association, free press, gender equality between men and women, so many other things. So you cannot just focus, and that is my problem with the Nigerian political class. Elections do not solve national questions. They have never, anywhere in the world. Look, they held elections in Ethiopia a few months ago. The country is on the verge of disintegration. So, being obsessed with election is part of the grand hoax of so-called civil rule in Nigeria. Every 4 years, we are given an opportunity. It's just an opportunity to change those who feed of the system. It doesn't go deep enough. So we have to deepen democracy in Nigeria before we can say hallelujah.
How do we do that?
Huh?
How do we do that?
I've just told you. I said you need to encourage free association. People must be able to form their own parties. You cannot exclude people from the system and think that they will be happy. And then the parties themselves, they have to do three things. They have to watch out for their recruitment mode, for their mode of preferment, so that the whole thing doesn't slide into what is known as modern prebendalism, in which a feudal prince just sits somewhere and allocates preferment to every other person. Of course, it breeds resentment, and resentment occasionally leads to rebellion. So we need to look at some of these factors and examine the situation. Some, as a matter of fact, have gone to the extent of saying that this country, a country like Nigeria, will never profit from Western-type liberal democracy, that we need to go back slightly to our traditional roots to see where we can infuse democratic governance with some of those traditional tenets.
I want to take it from where you just stopped, which is that various people have suggested various things. One of the systems that is currently in place, but which is creating, shall we say, equal harmony as it is creating controversy, is the question of zoning. And people are asking questions about that versus the issue of merit. We've got federal character, catchment area, all those things, all designed to foster, as it is said, a sense of inclusiveness amongst Nigeria's disparate groups. Is that working, do you think? Do you think it's working for us?
I think to a large extent, zoning is working. But zoning, don't forget, is not in the Constitution. It's a party affair. But somehow it has been burnt into the consciousness of the average Nigerian that zoning is the way to go. Why is that so? Zoning is an adaptation of what is known as constitutional politics in some of those countries. Netherlands, Belgium, even Germany to a large extent. And it's a situation of what is known as elite pacting. Before elections, the elite get together. What are the areas of rancor and hostility in this country? Okay, let us walk that over and begin to share and allocate posts in a way that does not threaten a multinational nation, a multi-religious nation, or a multicultural nation. So zoning takes over there. It is not an abuse of talent, because there's always a lot of talent everywhere, in every party and all that. But it's a way of bridging the polarities and polarizations within a country. It's a way of bringing the elite together that, look, you do this, and then we do this, and then the nation moves on. There may come a time when there is harmony, when you have been able to evolve core values, which we have not done in this country. Therefore, we can then say it's an all-comers event. But before then, let's do something that bridges the divisions. And it has worked. There was, under no circumstances would President Olusegun Obasanjo have contemplated replacing himself with another Southerner, both as a military president and as a civilian president. And that has gone on. That has gone on, Yaradua, and then Jonathan was defeated. And
Because
then,
he tried, because some will say he tried to break that understanding.
well, yes, he did. So now, you will now find that the clamor for the abolition of zoning is coming from particular interest groups who believe that they cannot wait for another 8 years to come and try their hand in power. But that's not how to build a harmonious society. You have enjoyed your own bit. Let others come in and try their hand in the system. So that's why I'm a meritocrat, but I think zoning helps us to solve a lot of problems in the country. And this is not the time to jettison it. This is a very, very critical point for the nation. It's not the time to jettison zoning, one way or the other. We must continue with it. Otherwise, it may lead to breakdown of trust between the factions of the elite, and It may also lead to a breakdown of the national ideal. Some zones will think that this is targeted against them, that it is almost their turn. Why are they talking about abandoning zoning? So it's a very precarious situation, and we need to be very serious and know what we are doing.
Now, you earlier talked about national ideal. And as you mentioned, national ideal and countries that probably have developed a national ideal, my mind went straight to Rwanda. I don't know if it's a good example,
It's not a
but
very good example.
why?
Why?
Yes, because I was going to ask if it was, because some people have argued that that's an example that a number of people should follow, or that a country like ours should follow. Others have said, no, it's not a good example. What do you think is not a good example?
Rwanda, well, this also brings us to a very interesting argument. Some people believe that in any society, you can't get all the freedoms you demand, that sometimes you have to trade one particular kind of freedom for another. For example, the Rwanda you are talking about, people have decided to trade their political freedom for economic freedom. Just leave it to one man. Let him forge this society. Although you can say that what led to the war might still be there now. What led to the genocide, the war, the Rwandan massacre, which is a Tutsi-based hegemony. That has not disappeared. That has not disappeared. But Kagame is so strong in his resolve that he has decided that he's not going to allow any ethnic rancor to rear its head. And the people seem to have accepted it. So a lot of people go to Rwanda today and they say that, well, it's one of the most peaceful and prosperous countries in Africa. But then that is because of the sacrifice of the people. If anybody wants to raise a party called Hutu, Mferawe, or whatever in Rwanda today, is a goner. So that's why, but how many people are there in Rwanda? How many people are there? Huh? You can't try that. You can't try that in Nigeria. You can't try that.
Some of your colleagues in the pro-democracy movement back then talked about a sovereign national conference where all the groups sit down and try to hammer out the kind of thing you are talking about, both for our politics, our economy, social interactions, and so on. Is that the kind of thinking that you have?
Yes, but you see, now in retrospect, unless in a condition of chaos and anarchy, you cannot have a sovereign national conference when and where there's a sitting government. That was Obasanjo's argument, in the sense that he had already been elected. The people had come together collectively to delegate authority to him. So where is the sovereign national conference going to derive its authority from? So that was part of the crisis of sovereign national conference. But the sovereignty that we are banding about, alluding to, actually ultimately belongs to the people. Because eventually Obasanjo had to have an about turn, and he organized the political, the conference on something.
Yes, in
In
2005.
2005, which was scuttled because only one item, which is the extension of tenure. There were about 214 recommendations of that conference. But because the tenure extension thing was hidden somewhere before, or somewhere in it, a lot of people thought, this is the red herring. So they just voted to throw out the entire thing. And this is where we keep making the same mistakes, We have had about 2 conferences thereafter, and they suffered the same fate. Where's the recommendation of the Jonathan conference now? It's gone.
So a national conference, perhaps. I mean, if we don't take a look at what has happened before, even if the sitting sovereign, if you like, organizes a national.
The sitting sovereign will have to step aside before you can organize a sovereign national conference. Of course, it has happened before in Africa. In 1989, I think in Benin.
In Benin Republic,
because the people were totally tired of military rule. Military rule had exhausted its historical and political possibilities. Kirikou was a sitting duck, even among some of his colleagues. So he allowed that, and he said he will abide by the wishes of the conference. But it's very rare to find that in other African countries.
But if we organize something akin, if perhaps then the organization, because a lot of your colleagues keep going back to this point, especially when they talk about restructuring and when they talk about the 1999 Constitution. They say that the 1999 Constitution itself is a document that is, in some cases, they talk about it being forged. In some other cases, they talk about it being fraudulent. And in some other cases, they say that even those who are operating it now did not know anything about it at the time they were contesting for the offices that were provided for by that constitution. So even if we set aside the sovereign part of the conference and we say, okay, we have another conference.
Who are these we?
The Nigerian people. That's what for example, someone like Mr. Akwadokun talks about this a lot. Chief Ayo Adebanjo talks about this a lot, that the ethnic nationalities need to sit and discuss Nigeria. And that if they agree that Nigeria is a viable proposition, how are we going to go about running it? And that already other people have decided that they don't want to talk anymore. They've talked. You've talked about 2005, 2014, and they've moved ahead to other things. So again, in between, from what you said so far, what I get is the fact that a conference for the sake of a conference will achieve nothing.
Absolutely.
So if we have a sitting sovereign and we put aside the sovereign part of the conference,
then the conference is not binding on him.
It's not binding on him, but it can come up just like in 2005 and in 2014, amongst others.
Don't also forget that there was something like Pronaco conference.
Conference, yes, which was also not binding on anyone because it didn't have. Okay, so are you therefore saying, Prof, that it needs to be sovereign so that whatever comes out of it is binding on whoever it is that is in authority?
Yeah. If you have a committed leadership, for example, like a new president comes in under a condition of chaos and anarchy, he sees the ways the country is going, he can actually organize a sovereign national conference in the sense that he can release his sovereignty to that conference, that anything that the conference decides will be binding on him. It can be done. It can be done.
How about fears that...
No. The 1999 Constitution you are talking about.
Yes.
It was a reflection of the balance of forces. Otherwise, people ought to have gone into the street to say, what is going on here? Where is the Constitution that this new government will use and empower it? But nobody did. Because even as at that time, Nadeco was suffering from struggle fatigue, which allowed them to make a lot of compromises that turned out very fatal. Very, very fatal.
So, Prof,
yes.
With everything you've said so far, would it therefore be correct to say, as some of your colleagues in the struggle for democracy have said, that perhaps in hindsight it was a strategic miscalculation for those of you who fought for the return of democracy and for the military to exit power, not to participate in the transition that then took place? that led to the return of democracy?
You see, one thing you must also understand, you have to understand the nature of the nation you are dealing with and the people, and even the nature of your own colleagues. Hmm? We don't have a tradition of long distance struggle in Nigeria. That's why a lot of people describe us as sprinters, short distance runners. Look, ANC was founded in 1912. It didn't come to power until 1994. So what is the rush for power? One generation dies, another generation comes up to continue to struggle and agitate. But because, probably with hindsight now, because there is no deep fundamental difference among the various factions of the Nigerian ruling class, whatever they say, it was very easy for people to say, this one is becoming something else, so enough is enough. Let us take what they give us. And you will remember that a substantial concession of the military authorities to the pro-democracy group was the registration of AD. And they said, okay, let's give this as a sop to them, which they took, and they allowed the AD to control its catchment area, all the states. They swept all the states. When it came to presidential elections, they also allowed a partnership with Umaru Shinkafi, and then Umaru Shinkafi, in solidarity and fidelity to the zoning formula, because Abiola had died and they were looking for opportunities to placate the Southwest, he also agreed to run as Falaye's mate. It was APP AD then. So, as far as some of those people are concerned, those concessions are enough. You win some in battle, you lose some, and you continue. So, but in retrospect, it will have taken a revolutionary leap for us to achieve all we wanted to achieve during the pro-democracy movement. Some of us will still have been in the trenches, all to no avail. Another danger then was that Abubakar was not very, very sure-footed in power. He did not plan a coup. As a matter of fact, Abacha, there is a report that Abacha was going to retire in June 8th, 1988 when he died. So he did not belong to any major power faction in the military. And therefore, his hold on power was tenuous. So probably the elders in the pro-democracy movement thought that if we destabilize this fellow and he's kicked out, he's probably going to be replaced by a more vicious anti-Southerner among the ruling military cabal then. So he was allowed to be. So these are some of the...
These are the various calculations
Absolutely.
that were brought to bear.
Yes.
It did. Let me now bring you to something that so many people will talk about as being some of the results of what has happened, what has transpired since we returned to democracy in 1999. You now have groups in various parts of the country who, as I mentioned earlier, have said, well, we've been talking. Now we need to go beyond talking. So you have in the East the now proscribed IPOB, but before them you had MASOB. In the Southwest you have the Odua group, as they call it, depending on which one you want to call it. In the north, you have the north central zone, those in the belt, what used to be known as middle belt, angling for their freedom from northern hegemony, as they described it. Then in the north, you have people saying, the Hausa Fulani separate from Kanuris and other groups in the north, especially when it came to the issue of the herders and farmers. And so again, a lot of forces pulling at the center of the country. What is that, as you think, the direct consequence of everything we've spoken about so far?
Yes, absolutely. And the nation now appears to be at the mercy of centrifugal forces. This is the time Nigeria needs a visionary leader. How do we proceed from here? Is it through cajoling? Is it through throwing socks at some of these people? Because if you look back, some of these movements, if you look back, the earlier movements of agitation, some of their leaders are now very comfortable because they have been sucked into the system. I was thinking that Buhari could learn from that as a way of placating some of these people. Their struggle is more political than ideological. In the north, it is more difficult to suck in some of those people because they want to fight on to death. They see the system as the enemy. But it's not the same thing in the south. It's not the same thing. So when you have too many enemies you are fighting, you take palm wine to some of them, according to, and,
But you don't see that happening, do you? It would appear as if some of the more hawkish, if you like, elements within the ruling class have decided that if you do that, you may then be encouraging others to step to the plate, and that might ultimately lead to questions about the country's unity.
That is the question. If you are ruling very well, why must there always be eruptions of contrary elements who want to bring down the states? Anti-state elements are in the ascendancy. So the fundamental question the ruling class has to ask itself is, why is that so? It's not whether you want to encourage some or not. Why is that so? What is the fundamental reason? There may be economic disaffection. It could be political disaffection. And the third point I mentioned the last time, it could also be spiritual disaffection. Nobody is addressing those problems. Nobody.
It seems as if everybody's attention is focused on 2023.
Absolutely.
Which goes back to what you said about
electoralism. Yeah. Look, and that is part of the weakness of political society, the death of the old Nigerian civil society, because you could see that coming. 4 months ago, it was as if the entire nation was going to collapse with all this noise, these separatist catcalls and clamors for the disintegration of the country. But you will see that in the last 2 weeks or a few weeks, that has quietened down now. Why is that so? Because the ruling oligarchy in Nigeria, they've been able to redirect and refocus the attention of everybody to what they think matters most, which is 2023. So, happy days are here again. Everybody is thinking about the election and all that. So there's
happy days
even IPOB has had to tactically taking a back seat. Otherwise, if they had encouraged the sit-at-home directive in Anambra State, anybody could have won the election, and there is nothing they can do about it. Of course, this will provoke them more, but then it will also provoke more violence on their people, on their infrastructure from the federal authorities.
Strategic calculation yet again, Professor Williams.
Yeah. You need to be very strategic.
I wonder though, because I'm trying to link what you said with what you've just said now, which is that perhaps then for the rest of the country, at least in the case of the Southeast, which is clamoring that it is its turn, given the zoning formula, that it is its turn. Every other zone in the south has had a chance at the presidency. The southwest has, the south
No.
has.
You're talking about the southeast now.
Yes, I'm talking about the southeast.
It is their turn.
That it is their turn.
Yes.
Yes. And but you also alluded to it when you mentioned the fact that they are now asking questions as to why is it now that it is our turn you want to cancel it and you talk about merit. Why not let us do our own? Then everybody can now come back and talk about merit. Do you think perhaps then the calculation that if the rest of the country does what it did in 1999 for the Southwest, in the case of the Southeast, perhaps it will be another positive strategic calculation?
Well, I'm going to be very frank here. The old zoning arrangement was not between the tripod of Nigeria. It was between the north and the south, that power should rotate from the north to the south. Nobody divided the south into southeast and southwest. So within those areas, you have to struggle for power. There could be a moral case for asking the much neglected Igbo sector to vie for power. But a lot of people will tell you that power is not served a la carte. For example now, with the victory of Soludo in Anambra, that might have foreclosed the possibility of an Igbo presidency. Ironically and paradoxically, in 2023. Why is that so? The two main state parties who will probably emerge as the winner in 2023 will probably not look in that direction in choosing their presidential candidate, because they know that they may not get the nod of the indigenous people there.
These are different calculations.
Absolutely. So, and now it is absolutely impossible. It is absolutely impossible to get the Southeast faction and the Southwest faction to sit down and come up with something. It has always been impossible. Now it is even going to be made more impossible.
Yeah, because some Southwest candidates are already being touted, even ahead of 2023.
Absolutely. So how do we combat that? Don't forget that when the North imposed Obasanjo on the Southwest, there was nothing anybody could do about it. They said that, well, we are kingmakers. We asked you to go and bring a king. You cannot choose the king for us. I remember a tough general saying that. I won't mention his name.
So they chose the king, but they chose one of our own to be the king.
Yes.
So do you see history repeating itself? Perhaps those same power brokers choosing a king from the Southeast who may not enjoy the backing in the Southeast like they did in 1999.
Well, that logic is more applicable to the Southwest.
Okay.
In the case of the Southeast, there is that mutual hostility. They do not see them as people you can repose power in without the country breaking up. That somebody of Eastern extraction may have to actually come to power and then proclaim a Biafra. Although they will have done their background check that this is not the kind of person who will do that. But nobody wants to take that kind of risk.
Let me bring you to something else which everybody talks about and which may in fact impact all what we have spoken about so far, even more than any other thing. Yeah. And that is the current security situation. I alluded to it when I was talking about the tribes, the issue of secession and so on. Everywhere you go in Nigeria, it appears, there's one form of insecurity or the other.
Absolutely.
Kidnapping, banditry, armed robbery, cattle rustling, herdsmen, farmers, and all of that. And therefore, I'm wondering if you think the concentration on the politics may not necessarily be wise, considering the fact that, as some have said, we need to leave the politics and tackle this one first before we return to the politics. Because if we don't tackle this, we may find that even the politics proves impossible to do.
I don't see General Buhari developing any new impetus or vision as far as the security situation is concerned. And within his limits and limitations, he has tried his best. If I were him, what I would do now is to form a committee of friends to oversee his honorable disengagement from power eventually. He has done. We now have to wait for new initiatives. I'm telling you, it's not going to come from this government. It's not going to, because they have a mindset about security. They have a mindset about the state of the nation. They have a mindset about the economy. And they say if you're in a hole, you stop boring, or we've been digging deeper. So we have to just hope that nothing major happens from all these groups, and just look for a new direction, which has to come anyway. Just hope and look for a new direction to take the country away from this cesspool of instability.
There are other things causing instability, Prof. We have a very large youthful population. Nigeria
why
has.
is that causing instability? It's economic instability.
Well, because most of them.
Did you prepare for the youths?
Well, good question. I was going to ask you, because what I was going to ask actually is that we seem to have also neglected the academic environment, the academia, the educational system. So those who manage to get in are not getting actual quality education. But there are a large number who are outside who are getting nothing.
If you want to ask me, the education system in Nigeria has virtually collapsed. Let me give you an example. If somebody took a degree from a university in computer system about 10 years ago, if he goes back to work now, he's going to be using the same system they taught him in the university. Whereas computer technology keeps evolving and changing on a daily basis. If you are going to meet your prospective employers abroad, they ask you when you graduated and you said 10 years ago, they will want to know the number of refresher courses you have done. Otherwise, you have become completely unemployable. So that is just an aspect of the critical danger that we face with education in Nigeria. All the libraries are gone. All the books in the universities are gone. All the great teachers of my period, they are gone. Some of them are dead. Some of them, they have even refused to enter into any dialogue with the nation. Some of them are alive, but they have, they have chosen the route of internal self-deportation. There are two kinds of deportation. You can be exiled and you can exile yourself. You are still in that society, but you are no longer part of it. There are a lot of people like that. There are professors, doctors, people who have studied in the highest institutions in the world, and they came back and said, this is a big mess. We're not going to be part of it.
You're not mentioning those who have migrated yet.
Oh, that is, of course. That is those who have voted with their feet.
Because in my research, I'm told that you are one of only 3 of your group who has anything any longer to do with Nigeria. Most of the others have relocated, and
Definitely, they are not coming back. They are, in fact, the recent phenomenon is that they are now telling their children not to bring them back to Nigeria. They are dying abroad. Yeah, they are dying abroad. So
but
it's so
then
sad.
what does one do? Because you alluded to it when you talked about Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah.
Education is the starting point for any kind of development for any country.
Yeah.
And so if the educational system is in trouble, as you seem to think in Nigeria, and there's manifest evidence everywhere, all these other things we have talked about so far, the politics, to some extent, the economy and so on, will be affected by the
Absolutely.
by the educational
Education
system.
is the critical linkage. And there are two kinds of educational crisis in Nigeria that is ongoing. You have the crisis of under-education, that is people who cannot get entrances and entries into higher institutions. You have the problem of de-education. That is when you deliberately under-educate somebody. And that is going on in the universities. In my time, you go for a lecture, and then on the same lecture, you go for a tutorial, which could be a different person. So you have a riot of countervailing ideas. That is no longer so. Nobody is anymore interested. The best and the brightest are not in the university system. So you have a case of what I described in 1986 as subsidizing educational illiteracy. The government tries to keep the level of educational development very low until recent times. You now find that many of the private universities are performing experiments in medicine that they cannot do in the public universities. How is that so? But go and look at the fees. How many will be able to afford that? So there's a total dysfunctionality in the country. Total.
I asked that question about the academia because it seems also that some of the maladies you've talked about have seeped in there into the academic system.
No doubt
People
about
used to
that.
talk about the ivory tower, and people used to talk about it being a community on its own, where the rules, the norms, the expectations were different. But now we have situations where vice chancellors are chosen on the basis of origin. And all the politics, all the bad things that were in politics prior to now have also gone into the university system at various degrees. So
Yes, yeah, it's unfortunate. The mess in the society has seeped into the university system. In social theory, you know that there is no way you can have an enclave of paradise surrounded by hell. The hell will break through eventually, and it is already hell in Nigerian universities. You don't even want to talk about it. I have that sense of residual loyalty to an institution that threw me up. I don't even want to talk about it. It's a major historical tragedy for Nigeria. Well, look, when I arrived at the University of Sheffield in 1981 to complete my PhD, I was supposed to be a postgraduate student. After my first seminar, my supervisor called me and said he didn't have anything to teach me, but that the university authorities have agreed to make me a visiting lecturer. So, if I was not paying any fees, I spent the next 1.5 years enjoying myself without any school fees. I was still formally an assistant lecturer at Ife. I was a visiting lecturer, the English department, University of Sheffield. That is an indication of the intellectual strength of the staff that I left behind, that brought me up. You don't have that kind of thing anymore. It's not possible.
Professor Williams, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
That's Newsnight today. Thanks for watching. We would like to hear from you on this conversation. Our social media handles are on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Please visit our website, channelstv.com, to get started. I am Ladi Akeridoluale. Goodbye.